From Treasure Beach in rural Jamaica to the United Nations and the global stage, Ambassador Curtis Ward navigated the geopolitical landscape as an international statesman extraordinaire. From humble beginnings with the nurturing and guidance of his parents, he won a competitive scholarship to a premier Jamaican high school where he matriculated before migrating to the United States to attend Howard University. There he earned his Bachelor of Arts and then a Juris Doctor and later a Master of Law from Georgetown University. After serving in Jamaica's Foreign Service in the Washington Embassy in the 1970s, he founded his own law firm, practicing law for 19 years in Washington, D.C., building a reputation of integrity and trust and dedication to service to the immigrant community. Appointed by the Jamaican government in 1999 as Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Jamaica to the United Nations with special responsibility for the Security Council Affairs, he served from January 2000 to December 2001. He developed a lasting commitment to international peace and security, human rights, and conflict prevention. Earning the respect of his Security Council's colleague, he served as the first chairman of the Security Council Working Group on Peacekeeping Operations. The September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States added counterterrorism to Ambassador Ward's portfolio. He joined the UN Counterterrorism Committee, the CTC, in May of 2002 as expert advisor and liaison with regional and international organizations. He developed and supervised the UN CTC Technical Assistance Facilitation Program and served as the CTC's principal proponent and advocate for global and national counterterrorism capacity building. In bilateral meeting with over 100 permanent representatives at the United Nations, he encouraged government to implement counterterrorism capacity building mandates, and he keynoted conferences and presented on counterterrorism panel in over 30 countries. He brought his vast experience and knowledge to international counseling, including 8 months in West Africa as head of a joint UN ECOWAS mission in 2008 to 2009, investigating the disappearance and death of some 55 West Africans in the Gambia. He has guest lectured at numerous prestigious institutions, including several lectures at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. In academia, as former adjunct professional lecturer at the Elliott School of International Affairs, George Washington University, and currently as adjunct professor in the Homeland Security Graduate Program at the University of the District of Columbia. He has a busy media presence as a host of Carib Nation Television, publisher of the Ward Post, and his podcast, Real Talk with Ambassador Curtis Ward. And his analysis and views are in high demand by radio, television, and the printed press in the Caribbean region. A devoted husband for 48 years to his wife Sonia, together they raised 3 children, Maisha, Tamara, and Kareem. His journey from Jamaica to the global stage is a journey of service and achievements. And as an international statesman, integrity and morality are the hallmark of Ambassador Curtis Ward's professionalism.
Welcome, Ambassador. We're honored to have you, sir.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting the video. And since you asked me to tell the gathering who I am and what inspired me to become a diplomat, I'll take the liberty of doing some of that, even though it may overlap with some of what's in the video, but I welcome this opportunity to address these scholars of diplomacy at the PALI, and I congratulate you on having these programs available. I can only imagine how valuable these programs are to those who participate, and I was listening in at the beginning of some of the testimonies, and I find them to be very impressive. There are significant overlaps throughout this discussion. It is often difficult to separate the issues. It's very difficult to discuss them in silos. Some elements of this lecture may be repeated throughout as we examine diplomacy. So bear with me as we go through this lecture on diplomacy. For example, in describing who I am, you will discern from my career path some insights on the purpose and practice of diplomacy. You will also glean from it some aspects of how bilateral and multilateral diplomacy intersect and are employed. I will start in the middle. While representing the UN Counterterrorism Committee, the CTC, at an anti-terrorism financing conference in Singapore, I was asked how was it that someone from a small country like Jamaica could become an ambassador and to be representing the UN Counterterrorism Committee at conferences such as the one I was attending in Singapore and numerous other fora around the world. I responded by saying, it's a long story. However, I will not burden you with the long version and all the details. Suffice it to say, I am from a rural area of Jamaica, Treasure Beach, where many of the men engage in fishing and agriculture, farming on small plots, raising animals such as goats, pigs, poultry, and a few cattle. Nothing of any major commercial scale, but basically a means of survival and feeding their families. At the time of my birth, Treasure Beach in the Peter Plains area of South St. Elizabeth, mostly at sea level, was a quiet place with low-level tourism. Treasure Beach has since become a tourist attraction for visitors from all over the world. I attended elementary school at Treasure Beach, then attended high school in one of Jamaica's quiet urban centers, Mandeville, nestled at 1,200 feet above sea level in the verdant Manchester Mountain in central Jamaica. I mention sea level and mountains because that basically describes the characteristic of Jamaica. And in an era of global warming and climate change, these issues are very pertinent to Jamaican diplomats. After working a few years in Jamaica, I migrated to the United States to attend Howard University in Washington, D.C., the American capital. I majored in economics and political science, and then attended law school for a Juris Doctor degree from Howard University Law School. I later earned a Master of Law degree from Georgetown University Law School, with a specialty in international law. After leaving law school, I began my diplomatic career at the Embassy of Jamaica in Washington, D.C. from 1975 to November 1980. During that period, I learned everything I could about diplomatic statecraft, especially bilateral diplomacy in interactions with U.S. government officials and with diplomatic representatives from different parts of the world who are serving in their country's diplomatic missions in Washington, D.C. I then practiced law for 19 years in Washington, D.C. before I was appointed in November 1999 by then Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Honorable P.J. Patterson, to serve as Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Jamaica at the United Nations, with special responsibility for Security Council affairs. My venture into multilateral diplomacy began in earnest on December 1st, 1999. Being at the UN, though in a multilateral setting, I was engaged daily at the bilateral and regional levels. The learning curve is very sharp when serving in the UN Security Council, as the agenda includes several critical and often urgent issues which must be dealt with by the Security Council in real time. I wanted to bear in mind the awesome responsibility of the UN Security Council for the maintenance of international peace and security, some of which I will discuss more as I speak about the UN generally. I represented Jamaica for the country's 2 full-year term on the UN Security Council, where my skills as an international diplomat was honed. That included participation in a UN mission to the Great Lakes region of Africa and chairing the Security Council Working Group on Peacekeeping Operations. I also represented Jamaica at a conference on Palestine in Pretoria, South Africa, during that period. Most diplomats in the world will never be fortunate enough to have the experience of serving on the UN Security Council.
Ambassador.
Yes.
It's just an honor to have you. I mean, this incredible track record. And as you know, our classes are also engaging and we allow our leaders to interact at the point. So distinguished leaders, please be aware that you may ask a question at any point in time. There was a big conversation in class last week regarding why Africa is not on the UN Security Council. Don't know if you're going to talk about it later, but are you able to kind of chip in a little bit? Because Africans are very concerned, and not just Africans, but the developing countries. Because how can you have a UN Security Council that sort of leads almost everything in Africa is absent? Why is Africa not there, and what's the strategy of Africa? What would your advice be for the African Union on what to do to get on the council?
Well, first of all, the Security Council is made up of 15 members of the United Nations, 15 countries, 5 of which are permanent: Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The other 10 members are made up of elected countries by the UN General Assembly to serve 2-year terms. 5 new members are rotated every 2 years. There has been decades-old efforts within the Security Council to expand its membership. And by the way, countries of Africa have been represented out of the 10 that are elected to the council. There's always at least one African country on the council at all times, but no permanent members. Why is that so? Reform of the UN Security Council has been something that non-permanent members have been advocating for many, many years, decades actually. There is a standing committee of the General Assembly dealing with reform of the Security Council, and the proposals being discussed include permanent membership for Africa, at least one permanent member from Africa, one from Asia, and one from Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, in order to reform the Security Council, to expand it and to add new permanent members, all 5 current permanent members have to agree on any change to the UN Charter with regard to the Security Council. Bear in mind, these are the permanent members are the allies from World War II. They created the United Nations, and they put themselves in a position where their role can never be diminished without their agreement. So far, while some of the permanent members are in agreement with expansion of the Council, I don't believe there is any who agree to create new permanent membership in the Council. What we have been proposing for a number of years is that new permanent members would not have veto power, because as it now stands, we regard the veto power as an anachronism which should be diminished, modified, or done away with altogether. Doing away with it altogether is not going to happen. Modifying its terms and its power could happen, but I don't foresee this happening anytime soon. As you can well imagine, if Russia was not a permanent member, the Security Council would have acted against Russia for the aggression against Ukraine, in violation of international law, which has been declared by the UN General Assembly by an overwhelming majority. There's no veto power in the General Assembly. All 193 members each have an equal one vote. Also, we find that when dealing with issues regarding Israel and the Palestinians, the U.S. government always, except on extremely rare occasions, veto all resolutions for action by the UN Security Council. I hope I've addressed your answer and explained why African countries are not, or Africa is not represented as a permanent member of the Security Council.
Very well explained, sir. Very well explained. Please carry on. Distinguished leaders, any questions? Please do raise your hand as Ambassador breaks these huge issues down. Thank you. Thank you.
President, maybe just addition.
Yes, Professor Omedi, please go ahead from Zambia. Go ahead.
Yeah, the other reason which has made many African countries not to be part of being the permanent, the other reason is lack of leverage in many African countries, because when it comes to vote, they don't want to support the countries which has been nominated to be part of that permanent region. So because of this region rivalries, it has caused many Africa not to be part of that 5 countries. But in Africa, we have countries like Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa. These are bigger countries. They can make influence, but they are lacking support from the other regions. Hence, this has caused us not to be part of the permanent members on that region.
In other words, Africans are still very divided, and so we can't get one big country that we can support well. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure Ambassador will comment on that. Ambassador Farai from Zimbabwe, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Kofi, and thank you to our great ambassador who is facilitating tonight. I have heard what you have said, Ambassador, and 2 questions have popped up. One of the questions is, why would we not have support from African countries that have been nominated? Why is the nomination done by the permanent members and not Africans nominating whoever they want to represent themselves in the Security Council? Number 2, when you said it's rotational for anyone coming in, which means every 2 years we have new members coming into the Security Council, and one of them is an African. Why do we then find ourselves in that position where we have a rotational member? Are the members who are going in on the rotation strong enough to stand up against permanent members? Because the permanent members probably have decided to look at the weaker nominations so they can keep exploiting and dominating the African affairs. Is that the status in the Security Council from the permanent members?
Okay. From my own experience, I had the good fortune of working very closely with the ambassador of Namibia on African issues. And with instructions from my prime minister, we were told to support the Namibian, to support issues that relate to ending conflicts and humanitarian concerns in Africa. And we carried that portfolio throughout my tenure, even after the ambassador of Nigeria's term expired, because we had overlapped. His second year on the council was Jamaica's first year. So after he left, Jamaica carried the African portfolio on the council, even though there was another African ambassador serving on the council, our advocacy far outpaced his advocacy. And we had developed quite a reputation in the council, so our word mattered. Now, there are times when the representation comes from countries that are not only weak in terms of their regional engagements, but weak at the UN. But it is the fault of the caucus, or I should say the African group of countries at the UN, because in order for names to go before the countries to go before the General Assembly for approval to serve on the Security Council, they first have to be approved by the African group, which numbers some 53 countries. So I think it is still 53. But every country that wants to serve on the council as an elected member first obtain the support of their region. In Jamaica's case, our region is Latin America and the Caribbean. So we would first gain their support and their nomination, but at the same time, the country itself has to lobby other countries outside of the region to vote in the affirmative for their membership. Now, there are some other questions. Oh my goodness. Miss Dr. PALI.
Ambassador.
Yes, can you remind me of the other questions?
Yes, please. Ambassador, could you respectfully please share with us maybe some of the core principles of effective diplomacy? Some of the core principles of effective diplomacy.
Well, I have that covered later on, but if you want me to jump to that now,
yes,
I should do so. How I have managed it in my notes. I think that's important to have some format. Well, diplomacy, I usually refer to as diplomatic statecraft. Simply put, diplomatic statecraft is the use of diplomacy by states in their relationships with other states and at the regional and international levels. I'm referring to bilateral and multilateral engagements. Of course, diplomacy is an art and a practice which forms the basis for international relations and relationships among countries. Now, as you most probably know, the term bilateral is used to describe between two countries, relationships between two countries, while multilateral describes engagements among 3 or more states. In the case of the United Nations, we speak of 193 sovereign states, meaning independent countries populating the global landscape. If you think about that for a moment, you will recognize that we are speaking about sovereign states with diverse interests. of different cultures, race and ethnicity, states with different religious practices and beliefs, and states with different forms of government, some democratic, some authoritarian, and some in between. States which yield massive economic and military power. States which are emerging economic powers. Developing states and underdeveloped states. In this mix of 193 diverse sovereign states, we have large states with large populations, island states and landlocked states, with each having different effects from such phenomena as global warming and climate change. States which often suffer from such natural disasters as severe droughts, devastating hurricanes and cyclones, rising seawater eliminating their viability as a state, states in which man-made disasters exacerbate or cause famines, untreated diseases, abject poverty, low-quality education and healthcare systems, states in which there are internal conflicts, and states that are in violation of war crimes and crimes against humanity. These are states which are all represented at the United Nations, all 193 of them at the multilateral level. This is how and where you operate as a diplomat at the UN. First and foremost, let me dissuade anyone who believes diplomacy is easy stuff. Diplomacy, diplomatic statecraft, is not merely a handshake and a smile, or attending social events and cocktail parties. Diplomacy is hard work. Top diplomats are sometimes called upon to engage in difficult negotiations, to achieve bilateral and global problems, to solve them. To be a successful negotiator, a diplomat must have certain important attributes, including high diplomatic skills, which are specific to diplomatic spacecraft. So, what is statecraft? What is diplomatic statecraft? And how is it used? Diplomacy is used in fostering and maintaining comity between states, peaceful coexistence among states of diverse interests, diverse race, culture, ethnicity, etc. Developing and maintaining peaceful and friendly relations between states, characterized by different levels of power and influence, as a neighboring state, belonging to the same region, or internationally. Diplomatic statecraft is employed by a third state as a primary tool for the settlement of disputes between two states, for negotiating peace, building peace, and maintaining peace at the bilateral, regional, and multilateral levels. Diplomacy is the art of persuasion. To preserve peace, strengthen peace, conflict prevention, end conflict, and good diplomatic statecraft is important in negotiations and mediations to settle disputes of all types. Let's understand, countries have been known to go to war over riparian rights and border demarcation. It takes diplomatic initiatives to prevent conflicts and to end them. So bear in mind, in all of this, diplomacy is the primary tool for communicating with friends and adversaries according to necessity. So let me put this in further context. As I indicated, much diplomatic statecraft is expended in negotiations, often to resolve issues at the bilateral, regional, and multilateral levels. In diplomacy and negotiations, there are few basic rules that determine the effectiveness of the diplomatic initiative. Top diplomats are sometimes called upon to engage in difficult negotiations, and to be a successful negotiator, a diplomat must have certain important attributes. Here are some things you should be aware of regarding the why and how of negotiations. Be aware of your interlocutor's strengths and weaknesses. I cannot overemphasize the importance of preparedness. Diplomatic efforts often fail for one side or the other because of lack of preparedness. The obverse is that successful diplomacy is based on the level of preparedness. The better prepared side holds the advantage and usually comes out at the top of the negotiations. It is not the virtue of your cause that will prevail. It is the level of persuasiveness of your cause. How you present and support your position matters a great deal. How confident you are in matters you are discussing. Having intelligence, foreknowledge on the issue is important when engaging in any form of negotiations. One doesn't have to have access to sophisticated intelligence gathering and assessments. Lots of open source intelligence is available. Open source intelligence is information gathered from publications, news media, public websites, and the internet. Open source intelligence is quite valuable and useful. Let me add, when engaging diplomatically, an important rule to pay attention to: be a listener. Do not speak over or interrupt the other party. Also be an observer of body language to better understand your interlocutor. Demeanor matters. How confident you are, you should show without you bragging about your credentials, but it should be made obvious to your diplomatic counterpart or the person on the other side of the negotiating table. Never underestimate your interlocutor on the other side of a diplomatic effort. Knowledge of the issue, superior versus inferior knowledge, is vital to success. Know everything possible to be known about your interlocutor and about the issue. Again, I emphasize, preparedness matters. If no solution is reached in that first discussion, Be sure to leave channels of communication open with an opportunity to continue with future discussions. But a rule of thumb, do not leave your negotiations or your discussions open-ended. Set a time frame for coming to solutions, coming to an agreement, and so on. And always expect your interlocutor to come to the table fully prepared. They know your issues. They know your bottom line. They know how far they can push you. They know what they can expect. They know you as a diplomat, what your power is to make a decision or give a firm undertaking at the negotiating table or in a diplomatic discussion. They learn about you, and you in turn must know about them. Everything that I just said that they know about you, you should know about them if you want to be effective. Also, ensure that there is no misinterpretation of your position. Be clear and concise. Do not bluff. If you bluff and fail to carry out what you said you would, that ends your credibility and your ability to negotiate with that country or that interlocutor. Don't lose your respect that they have for you by bluffing or lying. If asked what is your bottom line, for instance, which always is raised in negotiations, you don't have to give your bottom line. What you will respond with is that these negotiations will lead us to a solution that is mutually acceptable to both sides, without having to disclose what that bottom line might be. A skilled negotiator never discloses that bottom line. I want to touch briefly on some other issues. Also, never allow discussions to descend into an argument. You can disagree without being disagreeable. You can be cordial, and at the same time, you can be firm. I want to look at the impact of cultural differences on diplomatic relations and how diplomats should navigate these complexities. Also, a few insights on diplomatic etiquette and protocol that every diplomat should be aware of. Cultural differences and diplomatic etiquette are usually intertwined. Failure to understand cultural differences could affect the outcome of your interaction and negotiations with the representative of another country. Diplomatic etiquette could also determine how you create diplomatic friendship and maintain it. Don't underestimate the cultural differences when meeting and negotiating with another diplomat. The very way you greet matters. Diplomats for some countries do not shake hands, but by bowing their heads. you should reciprocate. Touching is not an acceptable form of greeting in many cultures. Always recognize language differences and respond to your interlocutor in their language only if you are fluent in it. Do not attempt to communicate in a foreign language unless you are confident in fluency. You may indicate that you speak some of the language, but do not pretend to be fluent if you are not. Your interlocutor will appreciate that you have taken the time to learn his or her language, but they will not hold you to a conversation in their language. At the same time, they should be able to converse in your formal language, or you must have a reputable interpreter in your meeting. I also like to wrap up, in a sense, with some essential diplomatic terminologies that every diplomat should understand. It's important when using the language of diplomacy to get your commonly used terminologies correct and in the proper context. I indicated that at the multilateral level, but it also applies to the regional level, there is an intersection of multilateral, regional, and bilateral interchanges among diplomats. When you speak of bilateral relations, you are referring to relations between two countries. But there may be regional implications. There may be multilateral implications. You have to always bear that in mind. Regional means a group of countries which may or may not include your own. Oftentimes, you belong to a regional grouping. And you have to consider the issues of that regional grouping when you are in a multilateral forum, whether it be in the UN General Assembly or if you're serving on the UN Security Council. When I was on the council, at least once per month, I had to report the activities of the council to all the members of the Latin America and Caribbean group. I had to brief them on what we are doing in the council, and in particular, what issues before the council might affect our region. Multilateral means 3 or more countries joined together by a treaty or agreement. The largest multilateral treaty is the United Nations Charter, of which 193 sovereign countries are members. But bear in mind, I will repeat, a UN diplomat engages at bilateral and regional levels daily. A country's top diplomat at the United Nations is called a permanent representative and addressed as ambassador, the title assigned by the diplomat's government. Each government representative office is called a permanent mission, which is staffed with foreign relations staff from the mission's capital. And that staff may include expertise on different issues that are being discussed and dealt with in the UN, or in the case when I was there, within the Security Council. Embassies and high commissions carry out the same functions. An embassy is a country's representation of a foreign country with the country's top diplomat designated as ambassador. A high commission serves the same role as an embassy, and the country's top diplomat is designated as high commissioner. These terms are used by diplomatic missions of former British colonies located and operating in other British colonies. So in a former British colony, another former British colony, say the missions between Ghana and Nigeria, would be called high commissions, and the ambassadors serving, the top diplomat serving in those missions, would be called high commissioners. The same thing goes for your missions with the United Kingdom, Canada, UK, New Zealand, India, and other former British colonies. Now, do you want to ask some questions here, or do you want me to continue?
Too much wisdom from you, Ambassador. Yes, please. I think at this stage, we will take questions. We do have about 5 minutes to go. Just too much wisdom from you. Distinguished leaders, please put up your hand to ask a question or two as we just draw in on all of this wisdom coming from our incredible ambassador. Please pop up your hand if you have a question. Ambassador, it's just too much wisdom. Maybe some quick word of, let's go to Ambassador Selma, please. Selma from Namibia, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador Ward, for everything you've said. I am just so glued to my seat in every single way. I'm so excited. But, you know, I must confess that I used to think that if I have to work for the government, I would probably just want to be an ambassador, because it sounded like, you know, you'd go to a different country and, you know, you go to cocktails and have a lot of good fun. But as you just highlighted, it sounds like it's not as easy as it sounds. But I'm very curious to know from your experience personally, what has been the greatest challenge for you as an ambassador, given the complexity of this role, and also as a lawyer, I guess, and also just as an observer, what do you see are some, maybe one or two of the generic challenges other diplomats tend to experience in this type of role?
Let me answer that before I hear another question, because it's very important. Certain issues are quite troubling and quite difficult. And when serving on the Security Council, for instance, there are certain entrenched positions from which it is difficult to move a country, even to accept a compromise. We had several of those in the Security Council when I was there, one of which had to do with the Intifada, the second Intifada in Palestine. It took us 3 days of intense negotiations, and I should say day and night, because we started at 10 o'clock on a Friday morning in the Security Council, and we ended at 4 a.m. Saturday morning. I shouldn't say ended, we adjourned to come back at 10 a.m. Saturday morning. And we went through until 3 a.m. Sunday morning, adjourned, and came back at 6 p.m. that Sunday evening, before we were able to eke out a compromise with the United States government, and we were able to vote on a resolution which was presented by the non-aligned caucus in the council, which I led at the time, and so I had to lead the discussions in the council to gain that approval of that resolution. The United States didn't vote for the resolution, but they did not exercise their veto. They abstained. And I must add, voting in the Security Council takes 9 affirmative votes to approve a resolution if there is no negative vote by a permanent member.
Hello?
This particular resolution was adopted with 14 affirmative votes and 1 abstention. Yes, that was one of the major challenges that I faced, but we had several challenges in our discussions in the council to get commitment on ending conflicts on the African continent. We had issues in the Great Lakes region between Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We had issues in other places, in the Balkans, for instance, in the former Yugoslavia, and there were very intense negotiations. We had the situation in Sierra Leone, and the African representation, which I was a part of, had to be strong and firm and actually demanding of the UN. Fortunately for us, we had an African Secretary General in Kofi Annan, and I believe I mentioned earlier, I had a partner with our ambassador, Martin Anjaba from Namibia, who pushed for resolution and United Nations and international cooperation to end conflict in Africa. So these are difficult issues, but you also have to form alliances. And most times, the permanent members break into groups. And so you have to meet their concerns while at the same time not sacrificing the urgency of the issues you are discussing in the council. After the Security Council, I served as an expert advisor and liaison between regional and international organizations for the UN Counterterrorism Committee. And while it was not a difficult task, it was quite challenging to convince many countries to implement counterterrorism capacity building mandates when their view is that terrorism was not their problem. I had to convince them, and I developed an argument to do this. I had to convince them that yes, terrorism may not have occurred in your country or in your neighbor's country, but terrorism affects all of us globally. And I was able to convince the vast majority of countries in the developing world to implement those mandates and to convince donor countries to provide counterterrorism capacity building and financial resources to developing countries. So it may not be difficult, but quite challenging. As indicated, I met bilaterally with over 100 ambassadors and government officials traveling to the UN during my tenure on the UN Counterterrorism Committee, and my travels around the world to over 60 countries is in a role to convince countries to implement those Security Council counterterrorism mandates.
Distinguished leaders, I believe Ambassador's contribution to global peace has not been recognized enough. Please, let's do that in the chat room and do thank you. Incredible work behind the scenes contributing to world peace. We'll take the final question from Mr. Lazarus, please. Mr. Lazarus from Botswana. We take the final question from Mr. Lazarus. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, our Ambassador Curtis Ward, for all the wisdom and the experience and the knowledge you've just shared with us. I just wanted clarity, I think, on one of your closing remarks, is the clarity of the difference, because I've always been confused with Ambassador and Commissioner. You explaining it, but I think he didn't think. I just need a follow-up and a clarification on the difference between the two, or really who is more senior and what's the difference, why, or it's just nomenclature or what? I thank you, and we have learned a lot from you, sir.
Okay. There's no difference in terms of their authorities in the bilateral representation. What it is that the United Kingdom and all of the UN, the UK former colonies, there are over 50 of them. I think there may be 54, 55 or so. They don't call their representation, their highest diplomatic representation in other former British colonies. They don't call them ambassadors. They call them high commissioners. But they have the same authorities, the same diplomatic presence, diplomatic immunities as ambassador to non-Commonwealth countries. And usually, for instance, at the UN, we call them permanent representatives. At regional organizations, such as the Organization of American States, we call them permanent representatives. And you can be a permanent representative or a high commission to one country or to an international or regional organization, while at the same time serving as a non-resident ambassador to another country. For instance, the ambassador of Jamaica to Nigeria, no, the High Commissioner of Jamaica to Nigeria, may be ambassador to other West African countries that are not members of the Commonwealth. I hope that kind of clears up that matter for you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And so, Mr.
Oh, and by the way, sir, I just want you to know that one of the countries in which I participated in a counterterrorism financing conference was in Botswana.
Wow, thank you for coming to our country. You are such a encyclopedia of wisdom. I need to connect with you. God bless you.
You're most welcome.
Incredible words from you. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be going to Princess Dr. Nikwe Bam in South Africa to help reflect on these deep conversations. Before I bring Princess on, Ambassador, your final words on this. Can you be quick-tempered and be a diplomat? Can you be quick-tempered and be a diplomat?
Well, you know, I was hoping to give you a brief synopsis of what it takes. We have diplomats at the UN, but I will skip over that. But the thing is, being a diplomat is an honor, regardless of what level you are serving your country. It's an honor. And regardless of what level, you must apprise yourself of all the issues that you may encounter while serving. You are putting the face of your country forward, whether it's bilateral, regional, or multilateral. The reputation of your country rides on your one-on-one representation with other diplomats. And when you serve at the highest level, it makes your job even more important and delicate. You can't afford to err because your error could end up creating a dispute between your country and the country that you have engaged with. So it's very important to bear all those things in mind, but paramount in your mind is what is the best representation that you can give to your country. And Dr. PALI, before I end, I would just like to inform your group that I do offer a 6-module course on diplomacy and its counterpart negotiations. And if anyone or any group has interest in this, they may contact you for my contact information. I hope that is okay with you.
That's absolutely okay, Ambassador. And we're going to put that in the chat room, or maybe you may put your email in the chat room so distinguished leaders may reach out to you. Thank you so much for your wisdom.